Now how come we're standing so near the drop?" Maya's words floated gently on the cool morning breeze. Her wheelchair wheels crunched softly over scattered pebbles. Charles Brooks remained silent, smoothing down his expensive cashmere sleeves, while continuing to push forward, his piercing blue gaze locked on the open space just ahead, merely 12 inches from a deadly precipice. At 9 years old, Maya Williams was fragile and small, her rich brown skin contrasting beautifully with the ivory cashmere wrap draped around her shoulders. 2 loose curls framed her face in gentle puffs, while her gloved hands gripped tightly to her wheelchair's armrests. Trust came too naturally to her. Even in this moment, despite her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. 30 feet away, concealed behind a cluster of evergreen trees, a set of light green eyes grew wide with alarm. Emily Carter crouched low behind a rotting tree trunk, her art pad pressed against her chest. She wasn't meant to be in this place. Her mother believed she was attending Saturday morning choir practice at church. Instead, Emily had slipped away to capture the dawn in her drawings. Art was her sanctuary. The cliffs of Beacon Hills had always brought her tranquility. Until this very moment, she knew them both instantly. Mr. Brooks, the generous man who gifted computers to their school and distributed holiday meals each Thanksgiving, and little Maya, the gentle child in the wheelchair. Emily remembered seeing her once at the grocery store, carefully holding a box of colored pencils, speaking with such sweet manners that it brought tears to the cashier's eyes. Emily's brow furrowed. What was he doing bringing her so dangerously close to the cliff's rim? "This place feels scary, doesn't it?" Maya's voice wavered with uncertainty. Charles paused, his palm resting against the wheelchair's back. "Maya," his voice flowed smooth as honey. "You have faith in me, don't you?" She gave a slow nod. "Shut your eyes, darling. I want you to experience the breeze one final time. This place belongs to us, just the two of us." Emily's heart plummeted. One final time. The scene that unfolded next would haunt Emily's nightmares for countless months. Without warning, Charles tightened his grip on the wheelchair handles, then took a deliberate step backward. The movement was quick, precise, and calculated. The chair lurched forward, rolled ahead, lifted slightly on 2 wheels, then vanished over the precipice. Emily pressed both hands firmly over her mouth. No cry rang out, only the harsh sound of metal scraping against stone, followed by complete stillness. Charles gazed down for one extended moment, then calmly pivoted around, brushing away invisible specks from his coat. He didn't rush or show panic. He simply strolled back toward his dark Ford Expedition, hidden behind the tree line. Emily held her breath until she heard the car door shut and the engine's rumble fade into the distance. She couldn't scream. Maya hadn't even screamed. Tears began to blur Emily's sight. Her heart hammered against her ribs as her mind shouted, "Speak up! Move! Act!" Yet her legs remained frozen in place. When she finally managed to stand, her knees trembled violently. She stumbled forward, gasping for air, toward the edge where the wheelchair had disappeared. The rocky descent plunged more than 70 feet, down into a maze of boulders and thorny bushes. "Can you hear me?" she called softly. Nothing came back except wind and hollow emptiness. But then, something caught her eye, a small flash of pale rose color. Emily leaned closer and spotted it. A piece of Maya's scarf caught on a branch partway down the cliff face, and beneath it, movement. Her chest constricted. Maya wasn't gone. She was breathing. She was hanging on, wedged precariously between rock and vegetation. Her chair had tilted but gotten caught in a web of roots. She barely moved, but her head turned just slightly. If you believe miracles still happen in our world, please hit the like button or leave a 7 in the comments, so Maya might find her peace. Emily let out a sharp gasp. "Hold tight." She scrambled back into the forest, hot tears streaming down her face. She had to find help. Someone. Anyone. But who would take her word? A child pointing fingers at Charles Brooks in Beacon Hill. He was a community cornerstone, a benefactor to the police force, a close friend of the mayor's office. And Maya was the adopted black daughter nobody mentioned unless cameras were rolling. She ran down the hillside, autumn leaves crackling under her feet, her lungs burning from the frigid air and sheer disbelief. One picture kept replaying in her thoughts, Maya's eyes wide open, aware and desperate. Emily didn't stop her sprint until she reached the front steps of a light blue house on Willow Creek Lane. The elderly man in the wooden rocking chair glanced up from his morning paper. "Grandpa," she panted. Thomas Carter pulled off his reading glasses. "Emily, sweetheart, what's wrong?" "I witnessed it," she choked out through sobs. "I saw Mr. Brooks. He shoved Maya over the cliff." The newspaper slipped from his grasp. Thomas Carter didn't respond immediately. The paper lay abandoned on the porch boards. His granddaughter stood before him, cheeks flushed red, her breathing ragged from running. Her fingers clutched the hem of her jacket like she was anchoring herself to reality. "Tell me again," he said softly. Emily's throat grew tight. "He pushed her. Mr. Brooks, he pushed Maya in her wheelchair right off the cliff." Thomas's eyebrows drew together. He rose slowly, his aging joints protesting beneath him. The morning. Air carried scents of maple leaves and moist earth. From inside, the antique clock struck 10. "You're certain?" he asked. Emily's eyes welled up again. "Grandpa, I watched it happen. He told her to close her eyes. Then he just released his grip." Thomas studied her intently, not with doubt, but with the grave weight of someone who'd witnessed too much truth get buried. He stroked his chin and turned toward the screen door. "Come inside," he instructed. "Right now." They settled in the kitchen. Thomas filled 2 coffee mugs, one dark and strong for himself, one half cream for Emily. He set a sleeve of crackers on the table between them. The radio hummed quietly from the windowsill, discussing early frost warnings upstate. "You've never told me a lie, Emily," he said. "I'm not lying now." That pause carried enormous weight. "But there's a gap between witnessing something and proving it happened," he continued. "Charles Brooks isn't just anybody. He sits on the city council's donation committee. He plays cards with the police captain. You follow me?" Emily nodded. "That's exactly why nobody else will speak up. Only me." He looked at her with a mixture of pride and terror. "I returned to the cliff afterward," she said. "She's not dead. Maya's trapped on a ledge. I saw her moving." Thomas's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "You're sure?" She still had her pink scarf on. It was snagged on a branch. Her chair's tilted, but she's alive. "I promise." Thomas stood up. He walked to a drawer and retrieved a flashlight, his walking stick, and a pair of work gloves. "We leave now." The path to Black Ridge Bluff was narrow and largely abandoned. The final town ranger who'd cared for it had retired 3 years back. Now fallen leaves piled high and the old wooden barriers sagged in defeat. Thomas hadn't visited this place since his late wife's memorial hike. Emily took the lead. "She's right past that stone ledge," she said breathlessly. They arrived at the rim. Thomas crouched down, his joints aching in protest, and peered over the side. He searched the drop, and there she was, Maya. Halfway down the cliff face, her wheelchair jammed between 2 twisted roots. Her body hung limp, but her head moved faintly, her arm draped weakly across her lap. Thomas's breath caught. He turned to Emily. "You rescued her." "No," she whispered. "We haven't finished yet." He pulled out his cell phone. "No reception." "Damn!" He clenched his jaw. "We'll need backup. But who can we contact? Everyone answers to him." "I know somebody who doesn't." Back in town, Thomas drove to a weathered brick structure behind the train station. Above the rusted entrance, Veterans Legal Aid Office. James Halliday, attorney. James Halliday was a Vietnam combat veteran turned civil rights lawyer. Nobody in Beacon Hill cared for him because he was too vocal, too principled, too inflexible, which was precisely why Thomas had faith in him. Inside, James was finishing. A bowl of soup, boots propped up on his desk. When he noticed Thomas and the shaking girl beside him, he set down his spoon. "Tom, what's happening?" "We need someone to listen," Thomas replied. Emily spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. She shared everything: what she witnessed, the scarf, Maya's motionless form on the ledge, how Charles walked away as if nothing had occurred. James didn't interrupt once. When she finished, he leaned back and let out a long breath. "Lord help us all." He stood and pulled a legal pad from his drawer. "We're going to record this. Every detail, your testimony, the timing, what she was wearing. I'll submit an emergency report to Child Protective Services without naming sources. Meanwhile, we get Maya to safety." That evening, Thomas and James returned to the bluff with climbing rope, a two-way radio, and a small first aid kit. Emily remained at home. Her mother had started noticing her absences. The air had grown colder, the wind more forceful. Maya hadn't shifted much, but when Thomas leaned over the edge and whispered, "Stay strong, sweetheart," he watched her fingers twitch slightly. She was still fighting. They lowered a water bottle with a message. "We see you. You're not alone. Help is on the way." James radioed the only paramedic in the region who owed him a favor, Pete Collier, a former Army medic. Pete arrived with a scowl, looked over the cliff, then whistled quietly. "That girl's a walking miracle. I don't understand how she's still conscious." Together, they planned the rescue, but Pete issued a warning. "If Brooks gets wind of this before we bring her up, he'll kill the story before it can breathe." James looked at Thomas. "Then we keep him in the dark, for now." That night, as Emily sat on her bed, staring at the sketchbook she hadn't touched since morning, her mom peeked through the door. "Everything okay, honey?" Emily nodded. Her mom smiled. "Mr. Brooks called earlier, said Maya wandered off during a family outing. Such a tragedy. Poor man sounded absolutely heartbroken." Emily's jaw tightened. "Do you trust him?" she asked. Her mom hesitated. "People like him don't have reasons to lie, Emily. They don't need to." As the door closed behind her mother, Emily opened her sketchbook to a blank page. She drew Maya's eyes, open, alive, pleading to be noticed. The wind howled softly that night, like the mountain itself was mourning. Pete Collier's hands remained rock-steady despite the cold. He threaded the rescue rope through the metal clip, tugged twice to test the anchor point, and faced Thomas and James. "We get one chance at this. If those roots snap, she'll drop the rest of the way." Thomas Carter nodded grimly. "Then we execute it perfectly." It was 2:13 in the morning. The moon barely pierced through the heavy cloud cover. From the cliff's rim, the narrow shelf where Maya Williams was stranded looked even smaller in the darkness. She hadn't responded to their whispers for hours. The note they'd sent down earlier, "You are not alone," still fluttered in the breeze, tied to her scarf. "Ropes secure," Pete announced. "I'm heading down." Thomas hesitated. "Let me come with you." "You've got a metal hip, Tom. No disrespect, but if you tumble off this thing, I'll have to rescue you too." James added, "You're more valuable watching our backs. If Brooks appears, we deal with it." "Understood," Thomas finished. Pete strapped into the harness, clipped his light to his chest, and began lowering himself down. Meanwhile, across town, lights still glowed inside the Brooks mansion. Charles stood in his office, staring at an empty glass, the scent of whiskey still heavy in the air. On his desk lay a sheet of paper, a police missing person report filed under his own handwriting, documenting Maya's disappearance as a tragic hiking mishap. No body, no proof, no inquiries. But something felt wrong. The child should have perished. The chair went over the edge. She made no sound. He'd watched it fall. Yet that afternoon, his housekeeper had mentioned something odd. Her daughter Emily had been acting strangely, drawing obsessively, whispering, and then she'd spoken Maya's name. Charles's jaw locked. He walked to the fireplace and tossed the report into the flames, watching it curl, blacken, and disappear. "Time for damage control," he muttered. Back at Black Ridge Bluff, Pete's boots touched the ledge. Maya. he whispered. The girl remained, still, her face ashen, lips cracked, but her chest rose and fell barely. Her arm was scratched and her jacket torn where the rocks had scraped through. A faint bruise circled her forehead. He leaned closer. "Sweetheart, I'm Pete. I'm here to take you home. Blink if you can hear me." A slow, painful blink. Pete exhaled in relief. "Brave girl," he radioed up. "She's alive. Vitals are weak but steady. I'm securing her now." James steadied the rope while Thomas knelt, eyes fixed on the drop. Minutes ticked by. Then a soft click echoed behind them. Thomas turned. A flashlight beam hit his face, and behind it stood Charles Brooks, neat as always except for the wild gleam in his eyes. "I should have suspected," Charles said quietly. "You just couldn't let it go." James stepped between Thomas and Charles. "She's still breathing, Charles, and the law's coming for you." Charles smiled, tight and bitter. "Nobody believes a disabled old man, a washed-up lawyer, and a child." "She witnessed you," Thomas said coldly. "You didn't plan for that, did you?" Below, Pete was securing Maya to his chest. "You think people care?" Charles sneered. "That girl was an error. My deceased wife's charity project. You want to waste your remaining years on her?" Thomas didn't flinch. "You already wasted yours on being a coward." In the silence that followed, Charles reached into his coat. James moved quicker. With a swift swing of his cane, he knocked Charles's arm away. The flashlight flew from his grip. Charles stumbled, his foot slipping dangerously close to the edge. "Enough!" James barked. "You want to make this worse? Go right ahead." Pete's voice crackled through the radio. "We're coming up!" James pointed toward the darkness. "Walk away, Charles. You've got 5 seconds before we contact the feds with everything." Charles's breath formed clouds in the cold air. He glanced over the edge, then at the two men, then turned and vanished into the woods. Thomas finally released the breath he'd been holding. By dawn, Maya was safe. Wrapped in blankets, oxygen tube in her nose, she lay in the back of Pete's van as it raced toward the local hospital in Salem. Emily sat beside her, holding her hand. "She didn't cry out," Emily whispered. Pete glanced in the rearview mirror. "Shock does that. The body shuts down." "No," Emily said. "She didn't scream because she still believed he'd return." Pete's grip tightened on the steering wheel. At the hospital, as doctors and nurses worked, Thomas sat with Emily in the waiting area. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A coffee machine gurgled in the corner. "She's going to survive," the nurse finally announced. Emily burst into tears. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved her life, kiddo." "No," she sobbed. "He tried to erase her like she never existed." Thomas nodded. "That's what cowards do. But you gave her back her identity, her chance. That's where justice starts." Later that afternoon, James returned from his meeting with his federal contact. "They're paying attention now," he told Thomas. "They've opened a confidential file. We build our case. We stay quiet. Let the truth do the shouting when it's time." Thomas looked through the window at Maya, who was sleeping now, her small frame barely filling the hospital bed. "We need more than truth," he said softly. "We need a voice powerful enough to be heard." James smiled faintly. "Then we find it." The morning after the rescue, Beacon Hill woke to an official statement from Charles Brooks, delivered through the town's most trusted morning radio host. The words echoed through every kitchen radio, gas station speaker, and cafe television. "My daughter Maya tragically disappeared during a private hike. I'm devastated. I ask everyone to keep her in your thoughts. No mention of the cliff. No mention of her being found. No acknowledgement of the helicopter that departed Salem Memorial at dawn, nor of the silence surrounding the ward where she lay recovering. To the world, Maya was still missing." At the Carter house, Emily sat with her sketchbook, a frown carving deeper lines than the pencil in her hand. "He's quicker than us," she said quietly. Thomas poured coffee. He's louder, not quicker. James entered, carrying a folder thick with printouts. We may have our first crack in his armor. He dropped the folder on the table. Inside, forged adoption, papers, altered medical records, and tax documents showing Maya's existence conveniently erased. Brooks didn't just want her gone, James said. He tried to wipe out that she ever lived with him. Emily flipped through the pages, stopping at a school enrollment form. Maya's name crossed out and replaced with student withdrawn for out-of-state, relocation. "Where'd you get this?" she asked. James smiled. "Your mother." Emily blinked. She worked in his house, filing cabinets, trash bins, emails. Apparently, Brooks left plenty of evidence when he started thinking nobody was watching. Thomas tapped the table. That's motive, timeline, and fraud. But we still need someone in law enforcement who's not in his pocket. "I know a guy," James said. "Down in Boston, a DA named Marcus Fielding, black guy from Roxbury, grew up having doors slammed in his face. He doesn't back down easy." That afternoon, while James drove to Boston, Emily visited Maya again. The hospital staff had finally allowed her into the room alone. Maya looked tiny in the bed. Her eyes were open, but her words came slowly. "I saw the sky. Then I saw nothing," she whispered. "You don't have to talk," Emily said gently. Maya blinked once. He smiled when he did it. Emily swallowed hard. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Maya asked, "Did anyone believe you?" Emily took her hand. "My grandpa did, and then more people did, and soon many more will." A tear slipped from Maya's eye. "I didn't scream because I thought maybe I deserved it, like I was damaged." Emily shook her head fiercely. "You're not damaged. He is." That evening James returned from Boston with news. "Fielding's in," he said quietly. "He's opening a shadow case off the books. If we can get a witness or physical evidence linking Brooks to the cliff, he'll move." "Witness?" Thomas asked. "We've got Emily." James shook his head. "He means adult witness. A jury will see a child's account and a rescued girl and still have doubts. But if someone else saw something—" Thomas thought for a long moment. "There is one person." He pulled out an old church directory and pointed to a name. "Mrs. Irene Douglas. She walks her dog near Black Ridge. Same morning, same time. She's observant, and she doesn't like Charles." The next morning, Emily and Thomas visited Irene's home. The door creaked open before they knocked. "You're late," Irene said, squinting through thick glasses. "I already made coffee, inside." The house smelled like cinnamon and old books. Doilies covered every surface. A photo of Irene's late husband in his Navy uniform watched them from the mantel. "I saw him," she said after Emily told her the story. "Saw him wheeling the girl toward the bluff. Didn't think much of it then, but he looked tense, like he wasn't speaking to her." She sipped her coffee. "And then later that day he was back. No girl, no chair, but he looked cleaner than usual, like he'd changed clothes." Thomas leaned forward. "Would you be willing to say that to a prosecutor?" She met his eyes. "For that little girl? I'd stand on the courthouse steps and shout it." Back at the Brooks estate, Charles was on the phone. "You're certain?" he said, pacing. "She's alive." He stopped, listened. "Then we have a problem." He hung up, then walked to his study and pulled a dusty book from the shelf. Hidden inside was a flash drive. He plugged it into his laptop. Surveillance footage. Night vision, grainy, black and white. The ledge, the rescue, Thomas's face, James's voice, Pete's silhouette. He smiled. "I don't need to erase her anymore," he whispered. "I just have to destroy them." That night on the local news, a story aired. Unlicensed rescue operation conducted on protected federal land. Beacon Hill retirees and former attorney under investigation for endangering a minor. Photos of Thomas, James, and Pete splashed across the screen. Emily's jaw dropped. "He flipped it," she whispered. He turned us into the villains. Thomas turned off the TV. Then it's time we give them the real story. James pulled out a dusty leather folder. Inside was a speech he'd once prepared for a civil rights hearing that got canceled. I think we still know how to be loud. By the time the sun rose over Beacon Hill the next morning, the war for truth had already begun. The town's local paper, the Daily Crest, carried a front-page story with the headline, "Retired Veterans Accused of Endangering Child in Unauthorized Rescue." Underneath, grainy photos of Thomas Carter, James Halliday, and Pete Collier mid-rescue. No mention of Maya. No mention of Charles. Thomas sat in the kitchen, the paper spread across the table, a grimace deepening with every word. Emily, red-eyed and silent, stared at the photo of herself in the background, barely visible, crouched beside Maya's oxygen tank. "He made us look like criminals," she said, and Maya like she was never there. Thomas folded the paper carefully, like one might handle a weapon. "Then it's time we respond." That afternoon, James and Emily walked into the Beacon Hill community hall uninvited during Charles Brooks's public relief effort press conference. Charles stood on stage in front of a camera crew and rows of folding chairs. Behind him, a banner reading, "Hope for Maya, a father's plea." His face somber, his voice measured. "We must keep faith alive," he said, "even when others seek to spread lies." James cleared his throat loudly. Heads turned. Emily stepped forward. Beside him, clutching her sketch pad like a torch. "We're not spreading lies," she said loud and clear. "We're telling what really happened." Gasps filled the room. A camera turned toward her. "She was there," Emily said. "I saw him push her. I saw the chair fall, and I saw Maya alive after the fall. We rescued her." The mayor stood up. "Young lady, this is not the place." "It's the only place," Thomas called from the back as he entered. "Because your offices were closed to us. Your phones went silent." Charles's smile tightened. "I've seen this before," James said. "A man with power controlling the narrative. But today, we write our own." He handed a folder to a local reporter. Inside are forged documents. Maya's enrollment wiped clean. Her adoption file tampered. Tax forms altered to hide her existence. This man didn't just try to kill her, he tried to erase her. All eyes turned to Charles. The mayor stammered. This is hearsay." "Is it?" came a voice from the aisle. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Irene Douglas standing in her Sunday dress, cane in hand. "I saw him that morning," she said. "Twice. Once pushing the girl up that hill and once coming back down alone, changed clothes. Not a word to anyone." A murmur rolled through the room, then a second voice. "And I'm the medic who pulled Maya out." Pete Collier stepped up beside them. She was bruised, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive. And she's still alive. I saw her this morning. Charles tried to speak, but it was too late. James pointed to the camera crew. "Tell me, when did justice become a crime?" That night, the story hit national news. Man accused of pushing adopted black daughter off cliff to protect reputation. Local girl and grandfather uncover shocking attempted murder cover-up. Veteran lawyer and child witness challenge town power. Broker. Charles Brooks was subpoenaed within 48 hours. And Maya? Maya was moved to a protected location in Boston under the care of social services. Her medical records restored, her name no longer hidden, Emily visited her one last time before. The trial. Maya was sitting up, a scarf around her shoulders, eyes brighter now. "He's not going to win, is he?" she asked. Emily shook her head. "No, he already lost the moment you survived." Maya smiled faintly. "I still hear it sometimes. The wind, the silence when he let go." Emily reached out and squeezed her hand. "You don't have to remember what he did. Just remember who saw you and who didn't let go." The morning of the pretrial hearing, Charles arrived flanked by 2 attorneys, wearing a dark suit and sunglasses. Cameras flashed. Protesters stood outside, the courthouse holding signs, "Justice for Maya. Power doesn't excuse evil. She deserves to be seen." Inside, Assistant District Attorney Marcus Fielding stood tall behind the prosecution table. "We are here," he said, "because silence almost buried a little girl alive. We are here because—" The powerful thought no one would listen to the small voice, but someone did, and now the world will. Emily sat in the front row, her sketchbook open on her lap. She wasn't drawing. She didn't need to. The picture was already clear. 3 months later, the courtroom was full. Not with press or spectators this time, but with ordinary people. Neighbors, veterans, teachers, janitors, even a few quiet teenagers holding hand-drawn signs that read, "Maya Matters." Truth has a witness. "Thank you, Emily." Maya Williams sat beside her court-appointed guardian, hands folded neatly on her lap. Her hair was braided tight, and a pink scarf was wrapped around her shoulders, the same scarf Emily once saw dangling from the cliff. Her legs dangled above the floor, still in braces, but her spine was straight. She hadn't said much since the trial began. She didn't need to. The facts had spoken for her. James Halliday, Thomas Carter, and Emily all sat behind her in the front pew. Emily's sketchbook was closed. She wasn't drawing. She was listening because this time everyone else had to hear. The judge turned to Charles Brooks. For the crimes of attempted murder, falsifying legal documents, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice, she said, "This court sentences you to 35 years in a federal correctional facility with no chance of parole for the first 20. Charles didn't flinch. He simply sat, hands clasped, jaw clenched. The mask he had so carefully worn all those years had shattered in the courtroom weeks earlier, first with the evidence, then with the testimony, and finally with Maya's own words. "I used to think I was hard to love," she had told the court in a trembling voice. "But I wasn't. I was just easy to ignore." Those words had silenced the entire room. Even the defense attorney had looked down at his shoes. Now, as Charles was led away, Emily looked at Maya and whispered, "You did it." But Maya shook her head gently. "We did." Later that afternoon, back at the Carter house, Thomas sat on the porch, a fresh cup of coffee in one hand, the other resting on a folded newspaper in his lap. The headline read, "Justice Served in Maya Williams' Case, Town Reels, Heels, and Hopes." Emily sat beside him, her legs tucked up under her, a blanket over her knees. "You think people really changed?" she asked. Thomas took a sip, then looked out at the street. "Some did, some won't, but enough have. And that's how change starts, quiet like a whisper." He reached over and handed her a manila envelope. "What's this?" "A letter," he said, "from the ADA's office. They want to use your drawings in the exhibit they're building in Boston. One about young voices that broke through silence." Emily's eyes widened. "They want to hang them in a museum?" Thomas nodded. "With your name on the wall and Maya's." The next week Maya returned to the cliff, this time not to fall, but to rise. She stood beside Emily, braces on her legs holding, onto a wooden cane James had carved himself. A small bronze plaque had been installed at the overlook. It read, "In honor of Maya Williams for surviving what was meant to erase her, and to those who chose to see her." Below the plaque, someone had tied a fresh pink scarf. Maya smiled faintly. Emily looked out over the valley. The wind lifted her hair. "You ever think about how quiet it was that day?" Maya asked. Emily nodded. "Yeah, but you know what Grandpa says?" "What?" "That sometimes silence isn't empty. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to speak." Maya looked over at her. "You were brave." Emily shook her head, blinking back tears. "You were brave first." That night they all gathered at the community center. Pete brought barbecue. Irene Douglas made peach cobbler. James stood up and read a poem he'd written in 1973 and never dared share until now. It was about a girl on a cliff and the town that tried to forget her. And Thomas? He just sat quietly in the back, watching the room glow with laughter, healing, and a sense of justice that wasn't loud, but deep. When Emily walked by, he reached out and touched her hand. "You good?" he asked. She smiled. I'm better than good. He nodded. Then we did what we came to do. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes through broken lungs, limps through quiet courthouses, and whispers through the voice of a little girl who dared to survive. And sometimes, when the world listens just long enough, that whisper becomes the loudest sound in the room.